Hi everybody, so I am back with our principles of training videos and quite possibly the most important aspect in principles of training, rest. So when we discuss rest, we generally refer to rest as being a state where physical exercise and activities are completely excluded. So rest essentially means no activity other than resting and sleeping. So it's not to be confused with recovery. So in general, recovery can be viewed as an active or passive state. An active recovery state is where some moderate or light exercise is completed. The intensity of that would be generally low or moderate intensity and not really very stressful at all. Then we've got passive recovery, where rest, massage, or some form of autogenic training is taking place. Something like relaxation techniques, meditation, breathing techniques, or visualization, which has certain physiological responses such as reduction in heart rate, reduction in blood pressure, breathing rate, and depth will improve as well. So when we talk about recovery, we split it into three different parts. So we've got restoration, which we're going to start with, and that would refer to restoring the losses incurred because of the training that you've just done. So restoring lost fluid and fuel, restoring the normal biochemical profile in the tissue, in the muscle tissues that were damaged and taxed as a result of training, and bringing your body back to that homeostasis again that we always speak about, back to normal resting level. So restoring those normal fluid levels and rehydration following intense prolonged exercise is very, very important. In addition to replacing those lost fluids, the replacement of things like fuel substrates, like muscle glycogen levels, is massively important to the restoration process as well. With a normal diet, that could take several hours to complete. The ingestion of things like protein as well as carbohydrates in the immediate aftermath of exercise will help to promote greater restoration of fuel, and then it'll give those worked muscles much needed repair, and it'll really, really help and assist that process. So having strategies to ensure that you've got that timely fluid and fuel replacement after working out is absolutely critical in the recovery process. The next part then is regeneration. So this component of recovery would refer to the recovery of fitness components, so things like strength, power, speed, endurance, etc., and those performance levels following a training bout. It's somewhat interlinked and dependent on the restoration process that we spoke about already. We spoke about it in the general adaptation syndrome, and how that supercompensation model plays into all this as well. So that the time effect of this regeneration is important depending on the bout of stress imposed. So like we'll say speed versus non-speed, a speed versus an endurance. A team sport would totally differ to a sprinter, for example, in terms of that regeneration. So for all athlete types, performance recovery for certain components will take several days, but it depends on the type of training you've just done or the type of competition you've just done in terms of regeneration. And lastly, in the recovery, we've got rehabilitation. So rehab refers to recovery from injury in particular. So while training and competition might induce micro trauma and damage in the muscle fibers and in the tissues, the type of trauma that's a natural consequence of training, that's totally normal. But we have, in contrast, that tissue damage when it occurs in the rehabilitation process could take days or weeks. Like if you sprain an ankle, depending on that, the severity of the injury, we've got rehabilitation is a part of the recovery process, and that's typically led by a medical professional like a physiotherapist in conjunction with a strength and conditioning coach to bring you back up to normal return to play. So in order to make improvements from training, we spoke already that the body needs to have that time to adapt before that next training stimulus. We spoke about that in that general adaptation syndrome. That bringing the body back to that baseline level again so that it can compensate for what's just been taken out, and so that you're prepared to improve again next time round. It's a vital part of the training process, and it's often overlooked, and it's always more rather than, okay, how do we measure and improve this? So to make sure that you are making improvements from your training, you have to allow time to adapt, and rest and recovery is absolutely vital before the next stimulus is applied. Like I said, it's often overlooked, but your training should take this into account. It should look at the rest versus work ratios in a whole macrocosm, in a whole macro as well. You're not just looking at little small bouts, you're looking at the entire week, the entire month, the entire 6 months, and the entire year of training. Some systems will recover to baseline slower than others, and that must be noted. So the timescale of recovery will vary depending on the system. And also, the recovery following training of systems tasks will be dependent on the recovery strategy used to help speed up recovery. So, depending whether you're a speed athlete, whether you're a team sport athlete, the type of recovery that you undertake is all dependent on the type of training you do, and that will also influence your return to play overall and your return to homeostasis and back to normal. All up, rest and recovery are absolutely essential. You would rarely ever put together a training program without knowing the end result, and you rarely, if ever, put together a micro block of training, even a week of training, without taking note of where the rest and recovery blocks are going to be placed in between the training bouts. So, for example, if we were to put together a training bout, a really simplistic training block. Okay, we've got speed, got a bit of speed and a bit of power work going on here. Okay, 2 fairly big sessions, all up about 60 minutes of training, and on a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult it was. This guy was an 8. This is really unrealistic, but and this one was a 9. You're not going to have the same amount of rest and recovery if this was a 2 and this was a 4 out of 10. You're going to have far more. So we're going to go green. I'm going to use all the colors here. And we're going to go, okay, well, I need to account for rest and recovery and regeneration from these two. So this is an hour of work. I've possibly got to look at least 48 hours for this power component. Let's say there was a lot of plyometrics put in here, a lot of ground contacts and jumps to develop that power. I'm going to look at somewhere between 48 and 72 hours, depending on how hard it was and how many contacts there were. So I've got to look at, okay, we've 1 hour here, 72 hours, let's say at its maximum end. I'm not going to be able to train this component until 73 hours time. So I've got to build that in because I've only got so much time in the week. Okay, we'll look at another component. Maybe we've got a bit of strength work. We can fit that in here. So you've got to be looking at where the rest and recovery gaps in your program are. It's not just a case of, rest and recovery can go in after. We've got to get X, Y, and Z done this week in training. To hell with rest and recovery. I don't really care where we fit that in. They got to sleep sometime. We'll just fit it in whenever. You've got to take it into account when you're programming. And you've got to look at, well, I've only got so many hours in the day, I've only got so many hours in the week of training to put together. I've got to fit in where those rest and recovery blocks are. And they've got to align with the severity of the training and the type of training we did. So all up, rest and recovery is probably the most important aspect when we talk about principles of training. But having said the fact that it is the most important, it is often the most overlooked. So whenever you're talking about training, there's a stress imposed in the system. You have got to rest and recover and regenerate to harness the benefits of your training. Okay, if you've got any questions or comments around that, feel free to drop them below. Subscribe to our channel if you're liking what you're hearing. If you want to know a little more, be sure to get in contact with us.